One technology that has really been gaining traction is the use of devices to collect physical measurements directly from patients. I've heard that from a few different companies, and I think you can get into the discussion of passive versus active devices and whatnot. Are you making use of those devices as well? And can you talk about what therapeutic areas or what data perhaps is being gathered with the use of those?
Yeah. I'm going to pull up a slide. Let's see if it works. Push to audience. Do you see the slide? Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to assume you see the slide. So the way we think about this in Sanofi is that we can use the same device for different purpose. And overall, we try to think of digital data collection for three different purposes. One is really to enable safety monitoring at home and to enable decentralization of trials without losing the safety oversight. That can include activity tracking. The second one is making sure that we can take the trial into the patient's home with regards to endpoint collection and whether those are regulatory accepted endpoints or endpoints that we use for internal decision making. We don't really differentiate there right now, and this would really be measuring all sorts of physiological processes. The third one is about value creation. So does the product that I'm developing really add value to the patient's life and quality of life? And in all three of these categories, you can include activity tracking. You can say, for safety, I want to know what is the number of hours that the patient is mobile. For decision making and enablement of home health care, we have in some of our trials activity tracking, not for the number of steps, but for balance and gait and real disease-specific features there. And of course, for the outcomes, in the end, I always say, in the end, we don't really care. Well, we do care, but in the end, we care most about what is the impact of the disease on a patient's life. And we do that with eCOAs, with eCOs, with eDiaries. But if we can measure that a patient is able to have a much bigger radius around their home, that could be a good indicator for value for the patients and the payers. So activity tracking itself, and that sounds maybe blunt, but that doesn't mean so much to me. For me, it is always about what are we trying to measure, and then what is the best device to measure that.
Okay, and obviously we're making these efforts for the patients. We started off by talking about the patient-centered R&D organization. So even though I think this is a novel way to collect data from patients, and I understand how it will help the trial and the quality of the data you get, are there any burdens that is created on the patients using these devices? Anything you're aware of or that you've heard from patient groups that maybe is something we still need to look at or still have to overcome in some way?
Absolutely. I don't think we're nowhere near the ideal world there. Of course, it is already a burden to ask a patient to complete a questionnaire once a day. It is a burden to ask to complete a diary card. It is a burden to come to clinic for special visits. It's also a burden to wear devices on your body or to upload data on connected devices. So but if we believe in the cause, if we believe that we are doing the right thing in the end to have better clinical development, to bring drugs to the market that have a real impact, that is then a trade-off that we have to choose. One thing that I feel very strongly about is that, yes, this creates additional burden. We have to minimize that. But most of all, we have to make sure that burden doesn't become an exclusion factor and that burden doesn't impact the population that we enroll in our clinical trials, and that that burden doesn't stand in the way, for example, of including diverse patient populations, that socioeconomic status it doesn't become a fact. So with all of this technology and the burden around it, there are a lot of other things to consider. And like Victoria said, we want to make sure that patients have options. And as soon as we make, of course, carrying a device or a connected device or a certain assessment a mandatory element of the trial, we have to make sure that it doesn't bias our trial in any other way. So that is what I want to say about the burdens, that yes, we have to, I think, accept them for what they are and constantly balance burden versus fun, but most importantly, make sure they don't exclude people from participating.
Great. And several people had asked a question about validation. I got a couple with the registrations that came in, and I see a couple on the screen here. Can you tell us if you want to use one of these connected or digital devices, let's say in a phase 3 trial, typically when is validation of that device performed?
It is an excellent question, and you have to start early, and that is why the teams of Vicky and myself are so close, because it really starts with the disease area strategy. The validation of, especially again, there's different types of purpose and objectives. So if we really want to use a digital endpoint as a primary endpoint in a phase 3 trial, which I don't think anybody is there yet, it means, of course, that it takes years to validate an endpoint and get the regulatory authorities around the world to accept that is the endpoint that is accepted as an efficacy endpoint in the trial. So that, I think I would say at least 5 years, and that's just from what we are doing right now. But that is a very high, ambitious target, of course, to be the primary endpoint in a phase 3 trial. Even if you want to use a digital assessment in a phase 3 trial as a secondary or tertiary endpoint, and you want to replace it in clinic assessment, you have to start early. And there's 2 ways of doing that. So, and in Sanofi, we're doing both ways. So one way is of course to build specific observational studies, non-interventional studies, just to test and validate a device or a combined endpoint with different tests in devices and in digital passive and active data collection. So that's one way of going. And what we've done is we've been talking to the regulatory authorities around the world from day one. So we've submitted every step of the way of building this endpoint. And the other way of doing it is use the phase 1 and phase 2 trials to validate the device that you want to use in the end in phase 3. And that's what we're currently also doing, that we're making sure that in a few phase 1, phase 2 trials with all the same in-clinic assessments, we run validation studies where the patients are asked to do both the in-clinic and at-home assessment. And we're making sure we collect enough data to demonstrate that the assessment has the same validity inside and outside of the clinic. But both take years. Yes.